Chapter 5. We sat on the thick throw rug in the central area of the flat. I leaned back against one of the mismatched sofas and took a deep breath. Lexi had been trying to explain how the power works, and I was not getting it. I could hear a bit of frustration behind her explanation, probably because she had repeated it several times already.
No, Finn, you can't just use the power to do whatever you want. It doesn't matter how badly you want to fix something or cure someone. If the act is not attached to one of the core virtues, you won't have any power.
Right, I replied. I know the power can only be used as an act of love or joy or whatever. But why can't I snap someone's neck in an act of love?
Are you really that tense? In what way would snapping someone's neck be an act of love?
Well, what about as an accident? I mean, what if I was trying to move a giant boulder off your leg and I accidentally dropped it on your head and killed you? Lexi frowned slightly.
Yes, you can definitely hurt someone by using the power wrong. Accidents happen all the time. That's why it's so important that you learn and practice how to use it properly. In fact, there's a pretty good chance you'll end up hurting yourself.
Okay, so the power isn't perfect.
You're an idiot. The power is perfect. We aren't perfect. That's how people get hurt.
I could see I was getting under her skin, and she was clearly trying to be patient with me. Admittedly, I was trying to poke holes in their fantasy world where people could actually use the Force, which gave me an idea. So, Lexi, is the power of creation anything like the Force from Star Wars? Do you have Yoda hidden back there somewhere? And Shadrach is actually a Wookiee, right? A voice from the kitchen area replied before Lexi could verbally eviscerate me.
You're closer than you think, Finn. Nella shuffled in from the kitchen. There are many examples in literature and folklore that relate back to the power of creation. Why don't you start by explaining what you understand so far?
Well, let's see. I tried to arrange the information into some semblance of logic or order and finally realized that it was all too crazy and didn't really make any sense. Well, it seems there are a lot of random rules.
Go on.
First, the power of creation can only be used as an act of love, right?
Partially, Nella replied. Any of the heavenly virtues such as faith, joy, hope, or love can be used to generate the power. Love is, of course, the greatest.
Of course. And Lexi tells me that the laws of nature still apply in all the same ways when using the power, so a stone will be easier to lift than a boulder.
Correct.
Also, she says that proximity is important, that moving or controlling something farther away becomes much more difficult. Preferably, touching the thing that you are focused on is best. And finally, the power can cause accidents when used incorrectly, even hurt people.
Well, that's a start, said Nella with a sigh.
Apparently, I'm a slow learner.
There are a few other basic lessons that may help. All humans have been given the gift of free will. Free will allows you to love God in return. When mankind was created, it was for the purpose of spreading love, so free will was a necessary component. Think of it this way. If you could force someone to love you, it wouldn't be love, but some type of servant-slave relationship, understand?
Sure, that makes sense, so far. Go on.
There is a downside to free will, of course. Free will opens all people up to the possibility of turning away from love, turning away from the Creator. Imagine giving someone a gift, and they immediately use it for the opposite purpose it was intended.
Like using a new set of golf clubs to pound nails, I said, trying to show that I was not a completely unteachable imbecile.
Sure. Now, the devil and his army, weak on diminishing power, found that people could be convinced to join them, to join their army against the Creator. And since they had free will, there was nothing the Creator could do to stop them.
Why on earth would anyone join the devil willingly? I mean, I can understand people losing their way and drifting from their religion, but not willingly joining the army of darkness. I made a mental note that if I ever started a goth band, I would call it the Army of Darkness, just because it sounded cool. Hey, I already know one song. Also, I was hoping that Nella would tell me that I was not in fact already part of the devil's horde just because I hadn't been to church in a couple years. Or maybe more than that. As if reading my mind, she replied,
Relax, Finn. You don't accidentally join forces with the devil, although there is often deception involved. This all started a couple thousand years ago, and fortunately for us, it's nicely documented in this book.
Naturally, she was holding up the Bible. I knew this was going to come down to Bible thumping at some point. I just wasn't ready for the parlor tricks.
It says in Revelations, Nella continued, the entirety of how Lucifer was cast down from heaven and imprisoned for 1,000 years. After he and his minions were released, there was to be a great battle for control of heaven and all the powers that go with it. Knowing that he had only 1,000 years to prepare for the great battle, in which they were already outnumbered, God decided to start enlisting help from the only place he could, mankind. Man had already been given free will. Now God needed a way for people to join him in heaven, so he opened the gates to allow us to join him. But there is a catch. In order to exist in heaven, one must be able to control the power of creation and use it as easily as one takes breath or generates a thought. Once the devil was imprisoned and the power of creation was made available to mankind, there was just one thing left to do: teach people how to use it. In order to do this, it had to be in a way that would not compromise free will. It had to be a choice people made to learn and use the power.
You're talking about his son, Jesus, aren't you? Nella nodded slowly as she could see the pieces coming together in my mind.
Jesus came to teach everyone how to use the power, thus allowing them to reach heaven and join the army of light, God's army. But, of course, that would have been too simple. Before the devil and his horde were locked up, they had already begun recruiting people into their allegiance. I'm sure you know the rest of the story. The devil's minions had captured and killed Jesus as well as most of his followers. Had it not been for the apostles, his core trainees, all of the teachings would have been wiped out. It says right in the Bible that his followers went from town to town curing the sick and performing miracles. They were using the power of creation, just as Jesus taught them. But the followers of darkness were much more cunning. Instead of just crushing or killing all the remnants of believers, they decided to infiltrate the ranks and corrupt the message so that the teachings would eventually be totally lost, diluted down to watery stories of some magical place where good boys and girls go if they make it to church and put their 10 cents in the basket. And it worked. Sure, the Christians were persecuted for centuries, but the real persecution came from within. Instead of spreading love and joy, people spread judgment based on rules and dogma and misinterpretation. For a while, many people entered the gates of heaven, but eventually fewer and fewer, till the gates of heaven grew heavy with dust and decay. Now it has been said that numbers within the ranks of the army of darkness outnumber the army of light 2 to 1.
Wait, I don't understand what happens when you die. Are you saying that you can't get to heaven unless you know how to use the power of creation? Nella nodded and sipped from her cup of green tea. Admittedly, I was a little excited at the possibility that heaven was a real place. Based on what I had been through, let's just say I had my doubts. And what happens to those who don't know how to use the power? Don't tell me they go to hell.
Well, yes, in a matter of speaking, but it's not what you think. Hell is not the place you think it is. Part of the distortion of the dark side is that they have distorted everything that is taught about heaven, hell, and how you end up in either place. Hell is literally the absence of God, and as we discussed before, God is love. So to be away from love, away from God, is torture on the soul. Literally, the absence of love is hell.
Wait, so I wasted all those years as an altar boy? As shocking a revelation as this was, deep down I wasn't that surprised. Let's face it, sitting through all those boring church services was pretty close to hell for me. Nella actually laughed.
Not wasted, but not thoroughly embraced either, I would guess. No, the entire ritual service that was devised was not a creation of God. Love is everything. Most of the people sitting in the pews at church are there because of habit or guilt. A few people definitely touch the eternal and are starved for more. And fewer still actually know how to do what God asked us to do. Love each other and join Him in creating a new world.
My brain tried to process the craziness she was pushing. That guidebook you were thumping references fire and brimstone multiple times. How do you reconcile your version to that?
Good point. I go back to Socrates, actually. Socrates said that a morally good act is intrinsically its own reward. The opposite must also be true, then, that an evil act is without the reward that comes exclusively from a morally good act. In other words, doing evil is its own punishment, because you are separating yourself from the reward of doing good.
I think the look on my face told her she needed to do better.
The fire and brimstone description of pain is the literal torment of the soul that is separated from the love of God. There are many reasons why humans feel the need to go a step further and introduce a level of actual physical pain into the equation of wrongdoing, but it just doesn't jive with the essence of a loving creator. People need to know that evil acts will be punished someday, because it sure seems like some evil acts are indeed quite rewarding in the present. We like to say, God will punish them someday. In reality, their soul is already in hell. They are just unaware. To apply a physical punishment for hell would be like going to a burn victim and breaking his legs for no reason. Why punish a person twice?
Somewhere deep in the recesses of my brain, a small light must have been lit because there seemed to be some logic in what she was saying. You still didn't answer my question about hell.
Indeed. This will probably upset you, Finn, but it is really important.
Nella sat beside me on the couch, and heaviness filled the room. This should be interesting.
Finn, we don't know all the details because, well, we don't have any reliable sources, but when you die, there is some sort of test conducted that will measure whether you know how to use the power of creation. If you pass the test, you get to enter heaven and join forces with the angels and those in the army of light. The test is called the probatus, and we don't really know much about it. I guess that makes sense. No point giving away all the answers to the final exam before the test itself.
She paused, taking a deep breath. Okay, Nella. Spill the beans. You fail the test, and then what?
You restart. Your soul is actually recycled into an unborn child, and you live a new life, a new chance to learn to use the power, a new life to learn to love like we were created to. But you obviously lose all your memories.
Wait, you mean like reincarnation? You're saying I could have been Abraham Lincoln or Johann Sebastian Bach in a former life? Sweet. Nella scowled slightly at me, sitting there with my normal goofy grin.
I'm serious, Finn, and yes, you could have been either of those people.
She folded her hands and looked down as if trying to think of something she could say to crack through my smart-ass outer shell. Good luck. After several seconds of silence, I stood up. No dice, Nella. You were starting to make sense till you took that left turn at crazy and ended up at reincarnation. Not only is it creepy to feel that I could have been any number of people before this, but also that my mother, grandparents, and everyone else that has already died is now most likely back as a new baby somewhere in the world. Nope, that pill is just a little too jagged.
Think about it, Finn. You may have lived 100 lives so far, just like everyone around you. Once in heaven, all your knowledge and memories of relationships, good and bad, will come back to you. Literally, everyone is connected to everyone else. There will be no strangers in heaven. We have all lived many lives that we will have connected with everyone else at some point. I don't find it the least bit creepy. I find it beautiful.
Interesting, no doubt, but too much to swallow right now. I need to head home. Thank you all for your hospitality. I raised an eyebrow towards Gladys, hoping she would naturally start reaching for the car keys.
Wait, you didn't tell him about the Seekers,
came a shout from the kitchen. Daniel was holding another sandwich, and the dog was sniffing it from behind him.
Tell him, Lexi. You know they'll get him.
Maybe it's the fact that Gladys hadn't budged, or maybe I had a soft spot in my heart for one-handed kids, but I took a deep breath and sat back down. Okay, let's hear about the Seekers. Lexi glanced at Nella, who had gone silent again, as if pondering whether she should just let me leave.
Well, we call them shadow seekers and hunters. They are the real danger to us right now, and the entire reason we stay hidden. There are those who choose to join the Dark Army and do the devil's bidding before the eternal war even begins. They are the ones tilting the scales now, here on Earth. As soon as someone is identified by the Seekers as being able to control the power of creation, the Hunters restart them.
Whoa! What do you mean the Hunters restart them? You mean they kill them, right?
Yes, but it is actually made to look like an accident so as to not raise suspicion. Things like car accidents, gang-related drive-by shootings, and random heart attacks are often covert ways Hunters restart people who are developing into a threat.
I mulled over the possibility of a hit squad run by the master of evil. And you think they're on to me? And that my life will now be in danger, right? For the 100th time today, I find myself regretting ever getting in Gladys's car. So how do I spot these elusive killers?
For starters, they try to be as inconspicuous as possible. The more attention they garner while restarting people, the more attention they bring to the reality beyond this one and the meaning behind all our existence. So being aware that you are being watched and targeted will go a long way towards saving your skin. Eventually, they will try more overt methods, but initially they just try to make it look like an accident that would never make the nightly news. By then, let's hope you have some ability to defend yourself.
I felt my blood pressure rising, even though I had no good reason to believe any of this. Groovy. Any chance you have some mug shots I can take a look at so I can see them coming? Lexi looked like she was getting uncomfortable.
Unfortunately, Finn, there are literally thousands of shadow seekers. Millions, maybe. No one really knows for sure.
Forget it, I interrupted. Enough is enough. Move it, Furball, I said to the large dog in front of the door. It lifted its giant head and looked towards Nella, who just nodded. As the beast got to its feet, I gestured with a slight bow back at the room. Thank you all for your hospitality and the entertainment. I guess I have no idea how you did all those things, but rest assured I will figure it out. I reached the door, and of course it was locked. I sighed and glanced back over my shoulder at Gladys, who was coming towards me with the car keys in her hand.
I'll take you home, Finn,
she said, and turned the door handle, and the door popped open as if I had just imagined that it was locked. I shrugged and followed her to the dark garage and found my way to the passenger door. Gladys beeped the horn once, and the main garage door behind us opened. She started the car and looked down at her hands.
I'm sorry, Finn. That didn't go as I'd planned.
With that, the car rolled out into the alley. I didn't reply. The black guy standing guard outside waved as we passed, and he closed the door. Gladys continued to wait for several seconds, and the guy came back over to the car, opened the sliding door, and hopped in. You must be Finn. I'm Tony, the Dole Man. I resisted the non-existent urge to strike up a conversation.
You don't mind me tagging along, do you? I need to get to that part of town.
I smelled a rat, but just shrugged. After all, I wasn't driving, and this wasn't my car. Gladys just drove on. The entire ride back, Tony talked. First about the rough neighborhood and how it had changed since he was a kid, then about the weather, then about how the Phillies are statistically guaranteed to win the World Series this year. I chuckled. Everyone knows the Cubs are going all the way this year. Heck, based on the way my day was going, crazier things had already happened. My mind was on other things. I felt drained, and the late day sun revealed exactly how much time I had given up to that crazy adventure. We finally pulled up to the coffee shop, and I turned to say something to Gladys, but she held up a hand to silence me.
Don't say a word. I know you are confused and frustrated, but please be aware that your life is in danger, and you need to be careful.
Sure, Gladys, whatever. See you next week at the hospital, okay? Tony just waved as I hopped out and walked into the coffee shop. I walked at top speed through the shop toward the back door leading to my apartment upstairs. My head was so full and tired, I almost didn't even notice her sitting next to the piano. Almost.